Okay, waiting a moment here for, there they are, Facebook. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Um, Today we're talking about loyalty. And I don't have to explain why we're talking about loyalty, we just are. But before we begin talking about loyalty, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. Delighted, as always, to be with you. It's really fun to see some new faces here in the chat this morning and some familiar faces. So if you're new to us, this is how it works. Joanne's going to talk about loyalty for about 30 minutes, and then I will be back in a little while. If you have questions about today's topic, we would love for you to add those down below in the Q&A, and I'll be back to take a peek at your questions. Thanks.
Wonderful. And I will also say, as I always do, that if you are here and if you are new to the History Matters community, if you're beaming in here for the first time, say so in chat, and you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. I'm going to test my brain here. I never remember which episode it is, but I believe this is the 242nd episode. I'm moving my notes, but to see if I'm correct. I believe I'm correct. 242, 242. Okay, I was correct. So at any rate, tell people in chat if you are new, you will get a welcome. If you have questions, as I think Annie just said, put them under Q&A. Do not put them in chat, and she will see them and pass them along, and I will ideally answer them. I do want to start with one brief thought that occurred to me over the course of this last week. And it's mostly because we're in times that are certainly not going to get less emotional and less fraught, right? Like we are now in this era, and it's going to become some interesting new kind of era moving forward. So I just want, I suppose in part because I'm so proud of our History Matters community, I do want to just say something really briefly here, in honor of and in protection of our community. For sure, maybe some of the things that I talk about are going to get people's emotions going. Maybe our wonderful chat, which is like amazing speed of light chat that people engage with each other while we're having these conversations. Emotions, I'm sure, are going to be going through the chat as well. What I encourage everyone to do is to not let your strong emotions about what's going on in the world right now, don't let that leak into your comments towards other people in the History Matters community. Um, it's going to be tempting, I'm sure, at some points to see someone say something and to feel really angry about it, or to say something that you feel strongly that is going to make people feel really angry. So I encourage you, in the same way that I've encouraged you forever, to think before you allow yourself to be rage harvested and responding to something that's meant to get you upset. Pause for a moment, either before you throw a really strong, ranty emotion into chat or before you respond to one. Because, I'm proud of us the way that we, for 241 previous episodes, have been here as a community talking about really difficult issues. And I want us to continue to do that. And who the heck knows what's coming down the pike? And for that reason, that's why I'm sort of offering this little comment at the beginning. Okay, now let's talk about loyalty. Um, so obviously, we need to talk about loyalty in part because of the appointments, or the whatever you want to call them. Donald Trump has been naming people who he wants to put into key positions when his administration begins, when he becomes president. And we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with the confirmation process, if there'll be one, how that's going to work. I can't speak to that yet. That's a whole nother question related to this one, but a whole different question. But regardless, clearly there are questions about why people have been placed in different positions, particularly because some of them have seemingly no qualification for a given position or have things about them that perhaps mean they're not the right person to put in that job. I'm not going to get more specific than that, but let's just say that some of the names being put forward to go into specific positions raise really serious concerns about why they are being put in those positions, given that in some cases it clearly isn't actual trained expertise that's putting them there. This raises the question of loyalty, right? The question that, and on the one hand, you can say that when someone becomes president, they want to be surrounded by people that they trust, people whose opinions they trust, people who they believe will be loyal to them. That's one thing. It's another thing entirely to not want any people to be in government offices of various sorts who are not proven loyal to you, right? There, the civil service, I mean, the government positions, um, people, I mean, I don't think I wrote the oath down, but president takes an oath of office, members of Congress take an oath, the federal judiciary, officers on the state, legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. There are oaths that people take, loyalty oaths, loyalty to the Constitution, loyalty to upholding the government, right? Loyalty to the thing that they're supposed to be serving, which is the nation. So loyalty is an issue. Oaths, although they seem really outdated and old-fashioned in a way, there's meat to them, right? There's meaning to them. They're supposed to be. And so if you are claiming that people who are supposedly not partisan appointments, but are put in a job because they're qualified for the job. I'm not talking about cabinet members now, but just people in government positions. If you are going to claim that all of these people now, rather than taking an oath, rather than being bound by the same rules and standards that control anyone who's in that kind of an office, but now need to be absolutely loyal to a president, that's a problem. That's a new thing. That's a different kind of loyalty. It's loyalty to a person beyond an immediate surrounding circle of advisors. That's saying that the government now, as a whole, needs to be bent to the will of a president. That's problematic. That kind of loyalty is problematic. So I want to talk a little bit about that today, about loyalty, about how loyalty is supposed to work, how it's worked in the past. I spent a lot of time this week in my lecture course at Yale. We have gotten up to Andrew Jackson, as luck would have it. So this week, this past week, and a little bit of next week, we're talking about Andrew Jackson and his presidency. And Andrew Jackson famously wasn't the originator of the idea, but began in a deliberate fashion the spoils system, very deliberately. That, he came into office, took the presidency, and then immediately began to put supporters and favorites and friends of friends into different government positions and offices to reward them, and because they would be loyal to him. Now, as I said, he didn't invent this. In one way or another, that's been a part of politics. But to claim it as kind of a wholesale way of proceeding as a president, in as blatant a manner as it appeared to be under Jackson, that was a new kind of thing. I mean, if you think back a little earlier, when Thomas Jefferson became president, the entire government, since its beginning in 1789, had been under Federalist control, and Federalists controlled everything, right? So now you get a Jeffersonian Republican, Democratic Republican president who takes office in 1801, and everyone is a Federalist surrounding him. And he had to battle with what to do about that. And ultimately, some Federalists were removed from office to be replaced by some Republicans. In that case, he wasn't demanding that they be loyal to him personally, Thomas Jefferson, but he was wanting people in office that at least were on his side of the partisan fence. He didn't sweep all Federalists out of office, but he faced that problem. He talked about it. and worried about it. And there was argument about it. And there were Federalists very upset about it. And there were controversies, right? Wait, why are you removing this person who didn't do anything wrong? Jefferson and his allies had to say, well, I understand what you're saying, but there need to be at least some Republicans holding some of these offices. So that was an issue in its own way. But Jefferson wasn't sort of giving out gift offices and eliminating people, all Federalists from office with a gift policy in mind. Jackson, who, really represents in a way the rise of a more modern idea of political parties that are, organized and networked and national and all the hoopla and parades and promises and spoils. That's all comes along with Andrew Jackson, who really is kind of starting a new kind of ethos of politics. So he gives offices when he becomes president to different kinds of favorites, right? Newspaper editors who served him well, suddenly they're given political offices. There is a fellow named Samuel Swartwout, and I'm smiling because the Swartwouts in New York, they were dueling Swartwouts, and it's such an unusual name. I have nothing against the Swartwout name if there are Swartwouts out there, but because it's such a notable name, somehow I always notice them in this time period. So there's a fellow named Samuel Swartwout. Apparently, he was an old Army comrade of Jackson from his earlier life and was a major league, fan follower of Jackson. And he's a New Yorker, and Jackson made him collector of the New York City Custom House, right? And that's where the government collects, at this point, nearly half of his annual revenue from the New York port. In 1838, Swartwout fled with more than $1 million that he had taken as customs house collector. I can't even tell you how much money that would have been in this time period. In this time period, it's a lot of money. In that time period, astronomical. Now, Jackson, of course, denied that there was any kind of political reason why he was giving office to these various people, and he claimed he was being honest and efficient. He made claims about cleaning out the corruption of government, right? He didn't use the phrase swamp or deep state, but that sort of ethos was there as well, that, well, we need to clean things out, put new kinds of people in. That's some of what he said that he was doing. But there was a Jacksonian senator from New York, his name was William Marcy, who put it pretty bluntly in 1832. He said, in politics as in war, quote, to the victor belong the spoils of the enemy. Spoil system, right? So that's just a way of saying Jackson was never that blunt, but that was the idea of it, that if you win, then you get to give out patronage as you choose, and it's all up to you, and it's conscious and it's deliberate, and it's partly a way of claiming and cementing people to be your supporters and rewarding people who have helped you. So in one way, it's a way to get loyalty to you, as if you are someone doling out gifts. And of course, it's also a way of getting government offices loyal to you, of bending government positions in a way to follow what you want them to do. So it's both of those things at the same time. So the spoil system, clearly there are issues. Poor Mr. Swartwout is a great example of what can go wrong. Now, there have been other moments in American history where people have wondered about who's taking positions and what their loyalties are. There have been loyalty oaths. For example, after the Civil War, were you an insurrectionist? Did you fight against the government of the United States? Seemingly, that should affect whether you can or cannot essentially work for the United States. And there were all kinds of discussions about loyalty oaths and oaths that people should take and people who simply should not be allowed to hold government positions anymore. Again, same idea. What are you loyal to is the ultimate question here. Are you loyal to the United States? Are you loyal to the Constitution? Are you loyal to the office you hold? Or are you just loyal to a person? And as I said, it's not necessarily a black and white division, because presidents need to have around them people who are loyal to them. But when you're talking about a wholesale change, You're talking about something that is no longer about getting trustworthy advisors around you. Now you're talking about warping the government to do what you want it to do and to bolster your power because you are now the Santa Claus of patronage. Like you're now giving out things to people and people will follow you if you are that person. So, the spoils system and we are seemingly watching it in action now, and who knows what's about to come, though I do want to mention something that might be coming based on what happened during Donald Trump's first term. Um, but it's a question, right? It's a fundamental question that seems almost too basic to be asked. What are you loyal to when you're serving in a government office? Now, in 1883, there was a major reform about government offices, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. And it basically said, and this is going to be a bad generalization, that you couldn't be dismissed or demoted without cause. It introduced merit exams for some federal jobs. It applied to a small set of government jobs, but the point was you couldn't be thrown out because your politics were wrong at a given moment. Again, depending on the position, and it was a small set of positions. It only pertained when it was passed to federal employees and a small number at that. Eventually, um, state and city governments took them decades to do this because that's where you really got a hold on those local offices. But eventually, reformers really worked at getting something along the lines of the Pendleton Act on a state and on a local level so that there were civil service laws like the Pendleton Act on a local level, meaning you can't just be thrown out because your politics are wrong, or you won't even sort of more fundamentally, you don't have the right kind of loyalty to be in the position. If you've taken an exam and you fit the position and you're doing the job well, you have certain protections against, in essence, partisanship. Now, excuse me, when Donald Trump became president, his first term, um, he talked a lot, obviously, about the deep state and wanting to eliminate people in the deep state. We do have a class of civil servants here, people with great amounts of experience who are loyal to the duty that they do in their job, right? Who are not partisan appointees, who are there, and it's assumed they will be in those positions through any number of different presidents, ideally, of different politics. And they're there because of their expertise. They're there because it is assumed what they are loyal to is the process of government itself. There are many really wonderful, earnest people who have committed their lives to public service through government office. And I don't even have numbers to give you, but there are hundreds of thousands of people that fall into that category who might have been appointed by one president and then another president comes along with different politics. But because it's not a partisan position, because it's a position that requires expertise and this person is doing their job as they've ever been doing their job, it's not assumed that a president takes office and then eliminates all people that are not personally loyal to him or someday her. Now, when Donald Trump first became president, first term, and towards the very end of his presidency, he issued an executive order known as Schedule F. And I encourage you to look this up because I didn't know a lot about this until I went rummaging around preparing to talk to you today. Schedule F, this executive order, said that there was a new class of federal employees that were no longer going to be protected with the protections I just mentioned. That was no longer going to be the case that they just can't be thrown out of office because whatever, they're going to be dismissed, that they are in disfavor with the president, so they're gone. It removed them from that kind of protection of serving in office. At the time, this was, I think, October of 2020 that this was passed. At the time, people who worked for Trump boasted that there would be more than 50,000 federal workers who now would no longer have those protections and could be ousted from office at the will of the president. Supposedly, documents that were obtained from the Freedom of Information Act suggest that the administration wanted to do even more than that and wanted to apply that new category to huge numbers, even more than 50,000 federal employees, making it easy for them to be ousted from office at the will of the president. Now, that didn't get enacted because it happened in October, and he lost the presidency, so it never went into action. And President Biden basically rescinded that order before it could go into effect. And on April 4th, 2024, the Biden administration finalized a rule that the aim of it was to clarify and strengthen protections for civil servants, right? So that that sort of thing, let's remove all protections so we can just throw people out when we don't like them, that would be harder to do. Now, President Trump, soon to be President Trump, has suggested that he's going to go back to this idea of Schedule F. Um, it apparently is something that is also supported by the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, that basically has said that they want to help prepare policy and personnel for, quote, the next conservative president. And so they're advocating for a revival of Schedule F to crack down on the civil service. Um, Supposedly, and I have not gone to find the source of this quote, and so I will read it to you and then say Google it because I don't know for certain. But supposedly, the architects of Project 2025 said that this will bend the bureaucracy to the presidential will, right? That's just outright. This will make the government work for the president in a way that has not been the case before, unless you're Andrew Jackson, I suppose. But still, this is an issue. Who or what are government employees loyal to? It means, if you lose that kind of protection, if Schedule F goes into effect and affects you, not only do you lose your protection as a government employee, but also union protections might be affected as well. You become, in a sense, an at-will employee, much easier to fire. So what we're talking about here, and obviously the issue is raised by the simple fact that, in a sense, we're watching the spoils system in action in the way that we're looking at some of these appointments and the qualifications for various people, like why Robert Kennedy Jr. should be controlling, the Department of Health when he has no medical training. That's a fair question, I think. But here, thanks. You have stuff to say about this, and I like you have the position. That raises all kinds of questions about why people are being given positions and how friends are being given positions because they want them and because the president likes them, and with no concern about these people being loyal to anything other than the fact that they are loyal to the president who gave them that office. That's a big problem, is the understatement of the year. It's a big problem. It's not the way in which a democratic government works, right? A democratic government is an entity unto itself, meaning, and small d democratic, meaning it operates as something that's supposed to keep the country functioning and have a variety of ways in which it checks in on different parts of the country and serves the public in a sweeping kind of a way and serves the public regardless of who the president is. The government, and granted, it's big and wide reaching, and people have complaints about that, although who complains about what is kind of switching side as far as parties are concerned. Suddenly, big government control on a national level is really popular to people who at one point really wanted states' rights, and now we're going to see a flip. But regardless of that, the government isn't owned by a president. The president is the head of the executive branch. The president has a lot of power over what the government does, and increasingly over the course of American history, that power has blossomed. So presidents now have an extreme amount of power as compared with what the amount of power that they had in times past. Regardless of all that, the government isn't his. The president doesn't own the government. That's what the Constitution says, right? The Constitution creates, and this is so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway because it just feels like it needs to be said. Our government has multiple branches. And sure, some have control over others in ways at different points that we might not like, but The two are not to be swallowed up by the one. Three branches, checks and balances, all those things we learn about in school. They aren't just things we learn about in school, right? They matter tremendously because if there aren't checks and balances, if there aren't guardrails, if there isn't the rule of law, if there isn't accountability beyond being accountable to one person, the president, you no longer have democratic governance. You just don't. So, I saw someone floated past me at some point in the last couple of days. Some online person said, the appointments in and of themselves that we're seeing, many of them are very shocking. Um, but rather than pay attention to that component of what's going on, more important to think about the ways in which those appointments may or may not affect the rule of law. That's what we should be focusing on now. So, by all means, comment as you wish on who's being appointed. And certainly, some of these appointments, in my opinion, appear to be shocking. But beyond that, the real important thing here is what does it mean with this person in this position? What is impact is that going to have, particularly with a position like, oh, I don't know, the Attorney General? What how is that person in that office going to affect the application of the rule of law to the United States, to American citizens, to people who are not in grace with this particular administration? That's the big question. And that's what loyalty ultimately gets to, the question of loyalty. What are you loyal to? Are you loyal to the Constitution? Are you loyal to the nation and the good of the nation? Are you loyal to the people you are serving? Or are you fundamentally, unquestionably loyal to one person? It's not the way our government was designed to work. I'll remind you of a document that I saw once at Mount Vernon, which I found moving at the time, and I still do. And at this current moment, it's in my head. And it was George Washington's copy of the Constitution of the United States. And he read through it. And in the margin next to anything that had anything to do with the presidency, he wrote, I think it was executive. I don't remember if it was president or executive, but he wrote in the margin, oh, this is part of what I do. This is part of what I do. This was a man trying to figure out precisely what his job was. Partly because there hadn't been one before and he didn't know, partly because he understood at this moment when the world was ruled by monarchs, he darn well better not be a monarch. And to avoid that, to be true to our democratic, Republican, both small letters, system of government, he had to understand the limits and boundaries of the presidency. That's what the presidency is about. It is not a grant of power without bounds. And again, George Washington, a long time ago, but he certainly, as the first president, understood the boundaries and the limits are everything. And if you strike at those boundaries and you strike at those limits and you replace them with personal loyalty, you are setting yourself up to be a king. That is what the Constitution was intended to guard against. They had broken away from a king. They were creating a government that was not going to have a monarch. That's what's important to bear in mind as we think about what people taking office in the months ahead, what they are going to feel loyal to, and what they are going to believe themselves to be serving on a fundamental level. Okay, I'm a couple minutes over. I'm going to stop. I'm going to move things around here. Okay, so for those of you, and again, I encourage you to look up Schedule F because it'll be very interesting for you to see. It was for me this morning. For those of you who are here and have not been here before, people are starting, you can see in chat to say mug, mug. Every week for 241 previous weeks, I had a mug that somehow related to what we're talking about. I love New Haven, so I don't want to say I'm in exile in New Haven, but all my mugs are in storage except for one mug. So I've been using this mug has a different message every week, but somehow it feels appropriate right now. This is my Mr. Grumpy mug. Mr. Grumpy is grumpy for a lot of reasons these days. somehow feels appropriate. So I know, and I kind of love the Mr. Grumpy mug all by itself. But so Mr. Grumpy has been here for a number of weeks. Mr. Grumpy's going to be hanging out until I get to also be in my New York City apartment. But remarkably and sadly, Mr. Grumpy does feel timely. So Mr. Grumpy, again, feeling very grumpy about some of what's happening and some of what it suggests about what this government and people in it will be loyal to or not loyal to or thinking about or not thinking about as they take office. Okay, Mr. Grumpy is very on point. I'm going to open chat so I can see what everybody is saying. Okay, excellent. You're on mute, Annie.
Sorry, I said I hope Mr. Grumpy Coffee in New York decides to sponsor History Matters. They're getting an
I know.
awful lot of free publicity. We should contact them, Claire. Seriously.
Actually, we totally should. And you have any number if you want to of photographs of me holding up this.
Right, we do. We do. AHA is in New York. I'm going to take some AHA folks down to Mr. Grumpy Cafe, and we're gonna try and get a corporate sponsor. Okay.
Excellent.
First of all, guys, I've put it in the chat twice. A lot of you are making great points, but you're only making them to the hosts.
Oh no.
So if you're not a regular Zoomer, if you look where you're adding your comments, right above it is a blue button. And if yours still says host, that means nobody except for Joanne, Claire, and myself have been able to read your comments. I tried to put a couple of reminders in. And also a couple of folks, remember, please use clean language. I think the only word I saw that I would be uncomfortable having was to somebody who was only chatting to the host. So you're only cursing at us. Nobody else can see it. But keep it clean, keep it civil, and make sure you're chatting to everyone, or else you're just really chatting to yourself because Joanne and I are busy hosting the show. Okay. That's my public service announcement. We have some great questions. We don't have 25 questions like the last couple of weeks. We only have 10. We might get through them. Okay, the first one comes from our good friend Kathleen V. Can the Senate be bypassed in the nominations? She said she's not sure if you know the answer to that, but if you're not a expert, it's okay. But can they just completely bypass the Senate and just
So we don't know the answer to this yet because we're looking at different scenarios, and it's totally possible that some of these scenarios have been declared more or less likely. I don't know. That supposedly these appointments are supposed to be confirmed. That's part of the process. But now we're talking about recess appointments, meaning if Congress is in recess, then you can appoint them anyway, and there won't be a confirmation process. And does the president have the power to, for example, adjourn Congress? And, supposedly, and again, I'm speaking with an absolute lack of expertise, but supposedly there's an obscure old rule that says that if Congress can't agree on the time when it wants to adjourn, that the president can then adjourn Congress. We don't want the president to be able to adjourn Congress, because if the president can adjourn Congress and it's in recess, then there won't be confirmation. So you could see the chain of things here. So the fact of the matter is, I don't think this is a settled question yet. It could be, and I could be missing some part of the conversation. But the fact of the matter is, appointments are supposed to be confirmed. That's how it's supposed to work. You're not supposed to be able as a president to say, here's what I want, and it's going to happen because I'm the president. Whether that will happen or how that will happen, I don't know. And I would suspect many other people don't know that either right now. And so there are all kinds of, in some ways, I think there are all kinds of trial balloons being floated around like now. Can we do this? Can we do that? And what's the response going to be if we do this and we do that? And actually, not related totally to the topic of today, but I do want to say this because it's important. If some of these trial balloons being floated out, it's worthwhile to speak out if they bother you, if they feel wrong, unfair, if you think that they are encouraging corruption, speak out. We're in a transition moment. This is a moment where we should be really loud about things we don't like, because if these truly are trial balloons, and if there's a mass response saying, are you freaking kidding me? You're going to do this. It may not matter. It's totally true, but it might. If it gets publicity, if it's loud, if it gets people to notice, it might. So, I've seen a lot this last week when I say speak up, speak out, this is a moment to do that. We can do that. It's important to do that. And some people have responded and said, you're going to see yourself as so naive once the everything kicks in and everything's going to change. And yeah, like it really matters to speak out. Well, it does. And it does generally, and particularly now. We have an administration that isn't in power yet. This should be a moment where we're being loud and we're bringing things to people's attention and we're pointing out things that are seemingly opening a door for corruption. This is a moment to do that. So, I know everyone keeps quoting my colleague Tim Snyder, right? Don't surrender in advance. Don't surrender in advance, right? So if things like this are bothering you, speak out. Don't cancel yourself by saying, "Oh, it won't matter." Public opinion still matters here. It really does. I've said this a million bazillion times here on History Matters, right? Our government is grounded on public opinion, on us from the beginning. That's the point. That's what makes it, among other things, part of what makes it not a monarchy. Public opinion rules. At the beginning, people didn't know who the public was. They had a very small idea of what public counted. That's changed over time. But what hasn't changed yet is that the American public is what governs public opinion, the public will, we the people. We are we are what govern. We are where power comes from. We give power, we can take it back. That's how our government works. So don't forget that in the emotion of the moment, thinking that it doesn't matter, because I assure you it will matter more than you think it does. And take the chance and do it anyway, even if you think it doesn't matter. Do it. Speak out. Get people to come together with you and speak out. It really, really matters more than you think it will. I can almost promise you that. Okay, now I'll get off my soapbox and we can go back to questions.
And I did want to note that Lenora had asked the same question. It was a duplicate, but shout
Ah,
out.
okay.
Okay, Francesca, our lovely friend from across the pond, says she has a two-part question. She said, "Have ambassadors frequently been chosen based on the spoils system?" And part B of that is, "What happened to Swarthwout and his million?"
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so ambassadors, I don't know the long history of that, but it certainly seems that in some ways, ambassadors are positions that sometimes are given to people who, a president knows well and trusts and puts in an office. I do also think that a big part of being an ambassador has to do with your way of being able to deal with other people. So there's a people person component of an ambassadorship that probably also matters maybe more than in some other government positions. So I can't definitively say like, yes, it's always, but it feels as though that's a component maybe more in those kinds of positions than in some other kinds of positions. Mr. Swartwout, I believe that there was a trial, but I don't remember what happened with Mr. Swartwout. So the magical people here on History Matters, someone's going to have to check, Tim, and find out what happened to Samuel Swartwout, because I don't remember absolutely.
I love how you said someone will need to check links, Tim.
Because
Tim's
that's
the link meister. If you're new here,
yes.
we have lots of people that are good at finding links, but Tim is our ultimate link meister.
Yep,
Uh,
Tim.
okay. Our good friend Rich Houston, who instead of being up in New England today is in Florida. So he's living it up in the warmth of Florida. Um, Rich asks, if Trump changes the way labor, Treasury, Commerce, and the Federal Reserve and other agencies collate and share economic data, how will voters be able to judge efficacy of policy changes?
Yeah, data. Yeah. Speaking broadly, control of information, control of data, uh, erasing information, eliminating information, hiding information, getting hold of information. Um, that's that is a way in which the people being governed have a power, right? Just as that question suggests, the ability to evaluate what's happening, the ability to understand what's going on, the ability to decide what might be better and worse. Information is power. So if you're someone who would rather not have the American people have as much power as they want to have themselves, you might not want a lot of data floating around out there. It would be better for people to be not entirely sure about things. So the larger question here, which is that, and we've seen this happen in the semi-recent past, right? Where like data, like regarding COVID, where suddenly like some states were like, nope, we're not collecting that data anymore. Sorry. Right. Oh, wait, huh? How can we judge? That's that, I am not an expert on strongmen and other such things. But I can say, generally speaking, controlling information, eliminating information, changing records, erasing records, like that's what you do when you want to deprive onlookers from having power. So it's an important question. I just said this to someone recently about the Department of Health. I was like, we might want to, like, there might be a lot of government departments that might like take care to preserve records right now. It's, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know is like the answer to a lot of questions right now, but it seems like protecting information could be a good thing just generally to do right now, I would say.
All right. Melissa Sutherland asks, I think many things will be pushed down to the states to create and cement state level. She used the term grifting fiefdoms, which Claire, please add that to our list of band names, grifting fiefdoms. So pushing things down the state level with the cover of saying that it's the real level of democracy. Is that a flip of the Civil War, the opposite of secession?
Oh, well, I guess I would back away from the Civil War and say more than anything else, and it's what federalism does, right? I mean, federalism, the idea that the national government has some power, state governments have some power, and it's not absolutely defined which has what. That was a compromise reached during the Constitutional Convention because the idea of a national something was terrifying. And if everything had been promoted as national in the new government, the Constitution never would have passed. But federal was a brilliant compromise. The idea being, well, of course, states still have power, and that felt safer and it felt more able to be adapted if things go wrong, right? Federalism was a very smart way to deal with a much stronger national government. That said, it does mean that we're constantly bouncing back and forth between who has power, what has power. And part of an argument always is, well, the states have the real power. It should go back to the states. Now, that's an argument, but depending on how a state is run and how their government is acting and what it does or doesn't allow and the rules put into effect by a state government, that may be true. It also may be true that there are people in power in a state who are not there in elected office who are doing things that don't necessarily reflect the will of the people. So I don't think you can absolutely say that putting it on a state level means it's closer to the people. It can be. It certainly can be. And it's important that we have both of those levels of government. But it's more, I think, and this is, who knows what we'll be seeing with the new administration, but with the people in control of the national government now saying the national government has powers and people who are not in control on a national level, the Democrats saying, states matter, we're going to see a lot of that. That's the um, sort of pull and tug and give and take of federalism. That's how that's supposed to work. Is that there's supposed to be, it's another form of a check and a balance. How that actually will work, I don't know, because we've seen all kinds of things happening on a state level during the Biden administration in response to the fact that the Democrats had the presidency and watching that play out on a local level. And I won't even start with gerrymandering and other such things. That's hardly new gerrymandering, but we've been watching a lot of extreme things happen on a state level. We're going to be watching to see how that plays out, obviously, under the Trump presidency as well.
All right. My good buddy Troy asks, are we going to have a constitutional amendment to secure nonpartisan, objective professionalization of the civil service?
Before I answer the question, I want to repeat what Deb and Paul, which one of them just said. Federalism is one of those issues that where you stand depends on where you sit. I like that. Anyway, I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Troy asks, are we going to have to make a constitutional amendment to secure nonpartisan, objective professionalization of the civil service?
Are we going to have to? Will we be able to? You
different
know,
things, buddy.
yeah, constitutional amendments are not an easy thing to do. It's possible to do them, but doing them is not easy. And there's good reason for that. But there's also frustrations and major problems with that. Equal rights amendment, I'm looking at you. So, would it be good if we had an amendment that did that? Perhaps, but the odds of that happening in the very near future probably not going to happen. There are lots of things that we could do that would be useful and would be a major change. But the bigger and more useful the change will be, the longer and more complicated it will be to make it happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it does mean you got to organize and prepare and think in the long term, actually, which is what Republicans have been very good at doing, thinking in the long term. Democrats have to get better at thinking in the long term and putting plans in motion and not being responsive, but being proactive about what they want. And now is going to be a moment to do that. And particularly, I mean, now generally, but again, particularly the next couple of months, be a great time for people to come together and organize and decide what they want and how they want to do it as a democratic form of government encourages, not only allows, but encourages.
And there's a couple of different people, Kay and a couple of others had added questions asking about that ERA has been ratified. Does Biden need to publish it, ask the archivist to publish it before he leaves office, or else is it just dead?
Does what have to be published?
The ERA.
Oh, does he have to publish it before he leaves office, or is it just dead?
Right. She's saying it's been ratified, but it hasn't been published. So that means it's not technically in the Constitution until it's published, I guess, by the archivist.
Oh, that I don't know. I don't know that for certain, whether that's the final sort of definitive answer or not. I actually don't know that.
All right. Um, Ellen asks, if the president-elect succeeds in dismantling the Department of Education, how will this affect situations like special education, student loans, etc.? Great.
I know I'm gonna come back to you momentarily, Annie, as someone with expertise here. I will say, in a general kind of way, yeah, it's gonna have a big impact, right? I mean, so on the one hand, you can look at federal agencies and say, oh, they're big federal agencies and they're imposing this, that, and the other thing, and we don't like it. And there are arguments to be made, and people make them all the time about government agencies. The other flip side of that is government agencies are worried for well-being and safety, of Americans in a general kind of a way and in a nonpartisan kind of a way, right? There's a great example of civil service positions that, like health positions, health and human services, like things that are there, like the FDA, like, watching out for, oh, like this form of food now has been found to have this horrible disease associated with it. Please don't eat this. Please don't buy this. Or there's a disease. Here's the best way to combat it. Things that a national organization can do and communicate effectively. Education, we're watching it be swept up and have been for years in the culture wars and what does or doesn't count as history and what people will or won't accept about the American past. But eliminating the Department of Education, besides the obvious symbolic suggestion of what that means, feels pretty extreme. I'm going to let Annie, who is the expert here, talk about what that suggests to her.
Well, what worries me the most is sending it back to just the states. Look at what's happened with the abortion bans.
Well,
Especially as
that's my
you know, special education, students with disabilities, it took a long time to get those rights for them. When my grandmother was a kid, she didn't go to school with any kids with disabilities because they stuck all of them in a home for kids with disabilities and kind of forgot about them. They encouraged families to put them to institutionalize them and that sort of thing. So I would really hate to see that, see us go backwards that far extreme. And everybody says, oh, that'll never happen. But we never thought some of these other things would happen that have happened in the last few years either. So I do worry our most vulnerable kids. This whole voucher nonsense is gaining traction more and more. And that's hurting the kids that need a public education the most. And I think that is part of their plan is The elite kids get a great education. Their parents save a little money on these private schools and Christian academies that they were going to send them to anyway. And meanwhile, the kids living in high poverty areas get further and further behind so that they continue this economic divide that is getting worse and worse. So that is my most fearful part
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Because again, if you throw things to the states, depending on the state, you can imagine what's going to happen. If you throw things to a greater degree to the states, you can imagine what's going to happen. Pax made a good point too, that the Department of Education destruction at first would affect funding, but
Mhm.
again, that then potentially affects everything. The fact of the matter is, it will be the people who most need assistance in some way who are going to feel a lot of things first. So kids with special needs in education, kids, funding school lunches for kids, like all these kinds of things like this that you would think like everyone supports and everyone wants them. Those are the people who have like actual like in the moment needs that are going to be most obviously and most immediately affected by some of the changes being put in place. And then the question becomes, what can be done to counter that once it's been put in place? I don't have the answer to that, but this goes back to my idea of speaking up now, loudly now about some of these things. That throwing things to a state level in some ways and for some things might seem like a good thing to do, but it's a vulnerability as well. Doesn't mean it shouldn't happen, but it means that every power shift, and there's going to be power shifts galore coming up in the new administration, needs to really carefully be evaluated to see who gets privileged and who gets disposed of, in essence, who gets cast aside. That's going to be a huge thing to think about, and it might not be something that people making these power decisions are necessarily going to be talking about.
Wow. All right. Lois S., we have a couple of Loises, so she specified Lois S. says, is the president-elect required to take the oath of office as a requirement to serve? It will be hard to believe the sincerity of that oath at this time.
Well, so those are, in a sense, those are two questions. Does the president have to take the oath of office? I believe they do. Does the president actually sincerely have to believe the oath of office? That I
Right?
can tell you. It's very easy, depending on who you are, to swear an oath and have absolutely no intention of thinking about it or abiding by it, or of convincing yourself that somehow you are. So I think this gets back to oaths and loyalty, right? That people swear oaths for a variety of different positions. There we go. Tim, the link master, presidential oaths. That he already violated the oath of office from 2017. I'm not even going to delve into, see, if you're new here and watching the chat, man,
The
like
chat is on
they're
fire
like
every day.
chat, always on fire. But at any rate, the question really is, does the person taking the oath of office have to actually believe in it or have any intention of abiding by it? And the answer to that is not necessarily. Oaths in that sense are kind of a seemingly old-fashioned thing. You swear an oath to God, and that's supposed to mean something. Uh, put a hand on a Bible, that's supposed to mean something. And for some people, it doesn't. And there we are.
Yeah, Dave kind of had a follow-up to that. Is there any legal penalty for violating the loyalty oath? It seems like they become nothing more than a norm that can be ignored without consequence.
Well, that's a different question. I actually had that written down somewhere in my notes for today. The larger question of accountability, right? The question of doing something that is obviously, wrong, maybe not formally illegal, but incorrect, shouldn't be done, or illegal and wrong. Will there be enforcement of anything? Will anyone be held accountable?
Yeah, he was asking if there's any legal consequences, Dave was.
Right. Well, and that depends on someone being willing to enforce the law. In
Uh,
the
the incoming attorney general, not bloody likely, as my British grandparents would say.
So this is the thing, is that enforcement matters, accountability matters. I've again said more than once, at the heart of a democratic form of government is the rule of law, is free and fair elections, and accountability. Just think about that at this particular moment in time. The rule of law applying to everybody, free and fair elections that we can trust in, and the accountability of people who we give office to, that they're accountable to us for how they use that power. That's the essence of democratic government. Really important to bear in mind.
All right. Deb and Paul, it says, are universities preparing for federal government attempts to influence their activities, curtail academic freedom, or threaten their tax through their endowments?
Say it again.
She's asking how like you're at a university. So how are universities or are they preparing for federal government attempts to influence their activities, curtail academic freedom, their tax status with endowments, that sort of thing?
I don't have real firsthand knowledge of this. But speaking of secondhand knowledge, oh yeah, they're thinking about it big time. I would bet, I would bet that there are, I would almost want to say the majority of colleges and universities in this country are having meetings to figure out, even on the most minimal level financially,
Mhm.
how things that happen might affect them, might affect their endowment, might affect, I would, I'm not a betting woman, but I would wager money that most universities and colleges are now immediately beginning to think about this. Yes, because it's going to be an issue. It will.
All right. Kathy Porter asks, Trump's upcoming installation could certainly strip us all of a system of checks and balances, tipping the balance of power towards the executive branch. Can Congress dig in to protect their power?
Can Congress protect its power?
Will they, could they dig in and protect their power? Like it's supposed to be checks and balances, but
Oh,
it's
they
like it's
could.
all towards one branch.
They could if they're willing to stand up to Donald Trump. Um, I can't remember which member of Congress was it who said on
Yeah, a
film.
guy from Texas last night said, oh, what is his name? Somebody's going to put in the chat that he wants to see the report on Gates, whether
Right. So,
they
so there are some people who are saying, yeah,
he
on
stepped down
him,
or not.
they're saying that. But there was another member of Congress who said, if Donald Trump tells us to jump 3 feet high and scratch
Oh
our,
yeah, that guy.
we jump 3 feet high and scratch
Yep,
our.
yep, that was very scary.
Right. So if that's what you're thinking, you're not thinking about protecting the power of Congress. You've already caved. Um, so, that's a person who is not thinking about checks and balances at all. So again, it depends. And this has been true for years and years and years, right? We're watching Congress and waiting for someone to stand up and particularly, a Republican to stand up and say, yep, stops here. Maybe the Attorney General position is going to be, something that encourages some people to stand up and say, no, I am not in the business of predictions on this front. As I've said a million times, contingency, you always have to allow for contingency in history because we look forward in time and don't know what's going to happen. We are not only now living in a moment of extreme contingency, we're living in a moment of off the charts extreme contingency, even more contingency than I've talked about before. We honestly just don't know what's coming next. We can guess. Oh, there it is. Troy Nels, maybe that's who said the jump 3 feet high, scratch our head thing. You're right. At any rate, we really don't know what's coming down the pipe. We need to think about it. We need to prepare for what we think is coming. We need to be alert and watchful as to what's actually happening and the implications of it. And as I said a little while back, we need to be sure that we're not getting so caught up in our emotional response to things that we're actually not taking a step back and thinking about the broader implications of what we're seeing, because in the end, that's what's going to shape everything,
Yeah.
not just cabinet appointments or various government appointments that in and of themselves are worth being emotional about. Above and beyond that, what does that mean about the functioning of government, about the rule of law, about the application of punishment, about so many things, right? It's the outcome, the implication of some of the things that are being put in motion but haven't really begun yet because Donald Trump isn't president yet. That's what we should be thinking about. That's what we should be talking about. That's what we should be talking about as groups. We should be organizing and talking and thinking and planning and doing any number of things, Now, now would be a good time to do all of these things and, prepare to be an us, a we, as we move forward, because we're going to need to be a we. We're going to need to come together to talk and speak out and act. That I can say, I can promise, as a historian, even. That's a fact. And we should be thinking about that now. Oh, we're 4 minutes past, huh?
We
Okay.
are. We only had two questions left.
Oh,
So,
want to try? We could see.
okay. So Z Wolf asked if you have any thoughts about Trump's leadership style as a cult leader. They said in watching some documentaries, and there seems like a lot of the points in those films seem to fit well with him as a cult status leader.
I mean, I'm not going to go into depth on whether he is or isn't a cult leader. I will say, generally speaking, there is such a thing as cult of personality, where people follow you because, whoa, you're a great guy, and we're going to follow you. Whether that, cult by a formal definition or not, it is true that he is someone kind of like Andrew Jackson, right? Andrew Jackson came to power saying, "I represent the common man," but didn't really run on policies per se. And then after he became president, sort of did what he did. Sometimes for and sometimes not for the common man. But is Trump a cult leader? I tend to stay away from using that word because I think it, like so many other words that people toss around right now in politics, it's too easy. It suggests like, oh, anyone who follows Trump is a nutty person following a cult. And it's way more complicated than that. And we saw that in this last election. So I tend to stay away from that word because I think it covers over other reasons why people are supporting Donald Trump that are not about cult-like following, but have to do with people who agree with what he's saying, who like what he says about things, and who are not just blindly members of a cult. And that's pretty crucially important for us to accept and grapple with right now.
All right. And the last question comes from our buddy Dave. Thoughts on if Biden were to step down for a couple of days for some surgery he said he needs and have Harris be POTUS during the interim? How symbolic would that be historically? So she just fills out for 3 months, I guess.
I have no idea. I mean, I've seen people talk about that in multiple ways, like what if he like just puts her in office for a little while? I have no idea what that would mean.
I think
Um,
that's a false victory. They also
I
talked about him putting her in as a Supreme Court justice if they could get Kagan to step down quickly.
Yeah. 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 I, on the one hand, we should speak out and do what we can. On the other hand, um, we should think about what we're speaking out and doing what we can. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do, but I'm saying that it feels as though people are throwing that out as we may have lost, but look, and maybe that's good, and maybe it should happen. I don't know. I'm not going to pass judgment on that, but I'm not going to say it's absolutely the right thing to do. In the same way, I'm not going to say it's not the wrong thing to do. It right now, it feels like a visceral thing to do, and I think we need to think beyond that kind of emotional response. Yeah, it would be historic for sure. There's
Yeah.
no on multiple levels. And I don't think that the vice president has expressed an opinion on this, or not that I know. I would have thought we would have all known this or heard this if she had. I don't know. At any rate, okay, so we're a little past. We should probably end. So let me explain now, particularly to all the new folk who came here for the first time, what happens next. So next we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we are no longer going to be recording this conversation, so we could be even freer and easier than we were during that conversation, which really wasn't formal, but we can be even less formal. If you are watching us from the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations. And then you too will be in the after party where we will talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about. As ever, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. These conversations are going to be increasingly important for ever so many reasons. And for 242 weeks you've been here, and that matters a whole heck of a lot, the understatement of the year. Thank you for this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here and in being willing to talk and ask questions and discuss. we are, in that sense, talking about change, our ability to decide, to evaluate, and to push for change. And that matters. It's going to matter more than ever coming up. And you are putting yourself here, forming yourself here as the community that we are. And that matters too, in a big way. I know for me, it certainly does. That I feel every Friday, I'm like looking forward to the end of the week when this community gathers here and we can confront and talk about what the heck just happened in the previous week and what history can tell us about it and how we should be thinking about this together. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Jessica and NCHE and John and my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, and the wonderful Claire as well for being here, for making this possible, for helping this community be here week after week. And I will shut up and we can go to the after party.